Welcome, Carmen, and thank you for being here with us today. We're eager to hear your peer story and hear about your journey as an entrepreneur. I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you to introduce yourself and tell us about your peer story.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. My peer story to start with. So I was misdiagnosed with bipolar in my 20s, but when basically how I knew something wasn't right is I had depression as a teen. And I also had, in middle school, I had Tourette's really badly. I would blink. For those of you that don't know, it's just not screaming obscenities, but I would blink, I would hum. It's kind of like nervous tics, but on crack. Just really bad. Like I would kick my leg up. It was really noticeable. And my parents, I think, really didn't know what was happening. It was in the early 80s. And my mom would later say, like, she just didn't know. She thought it was just something that was happening and it would change and it was weird. But she told me that she asked the doctor and the doctor kind of minimized it and said I would grow out of it. But that was after I complained that I never got a diagnosis for ADHD. So I think that she might have just slid that in there like, oh, but I was trying. And I think anxiety has been my friend for a very long time, but I didn't really know or understand what that was until I got a little bit older. School was really difficult for me because it was so hard to pay attention and I was so bored all the time. I graduated high school with, I think, a 1.5 or 1.6, whatever is like the lowest C possible. I did better in grad school, so there's hope because I was interested in it. And I believe that I graduated with a 3.8. So, I mean, when it comes to ADHD, school is a big part of the story because that's when a lot of the symptoms arise from the challenges. So for those of you that just think ADHD is impulsivity, there's a lot more to it. Missing deadlines, poor working memory. So I can forget words in a conversation or speech, or forget I was boiling water, or I forget that I plugged in the iron or that a candle's on. I mean, it actually happens a lot. So I make sure now whenever I do something like that, that I put it away from anything that might cause a fire. It's a lot. It's a lot. Impulsivity, so that I think can be misdiagnosed as bipolar disorder because of the needing constant stimulation. And I don't mean physically, I mean mentally, just always need to have something going on. And that can look like mania because I'll say, oh, it sounds great for me to do this thing or buy this or whatever. There's always been restlessness, nervous energy, getting bored easily, procrastination, and sensory problems. So it's a lot of neurological stuff as well. One of the questions that Sherry and I talked about is, how did that make me feel? How did all those things make me feel? And it made me feel really stupid, actually. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 42, and that was because I advocated for myself and pushed for the diagnosis. I was being treated for depression and on an antidepressant, and whatever symptoms were happening at the time, the nurse said, the ARNP said, well, maybe we should add a mood stabilizer. And I had tried that before because I'd heard the same thing before. And I just couldn't physically, my body just couldn't take a mood stabilizer. So I said, you know what, why don't we do the testing for ADHD? It's something that we talked about. I did the little like 1-page assessment. And she said, it seems like you definitely have ADHD, but it's something that we had never really gone over and never been treated for. So I got the assessment, and sure enough, I was diagnosed with it. I got assessed by a psychologist, and it was about 6 hours total. The testing itself was about 3, so don't let it freak you out, all my ADHD people who haven't been diagnosed and you want to be, because when I was in there and she told me the story, she told me that the testing was going to be that long. Of course, I was like, oh my God, like I can't sit still for that long. And maybe some of you can relate to that. So, but there were accommodations. Right when she said that, she said, but you can choose where you want to sit. You can take a break when you want to. And I was like, well, this is what it could have been like in school if I would have known about this earlier. So it was really amazing. And I actually learned that from the testing that I have an above average IQ. So what a miracle, thinking the entire time in school that I'm really stupid, but thinking like in my head, I know I'm not stupid, but this stuff is really frustrating. Math is really frustrating. Reading, sometimes I don't comprehend and I have to read over and over and over again. So it was really validating to get tested, and I highly recommend it for those of you that think you might have ADHD, because it's a lot more than just being distracted or saying like, look, a squirrel. It's a lot more than that. It really affects a lot of things in our lives.
Wow. So how did you learn to manage those symptoms?
Well, the psychologist recommended a book called Driven to Distraction, which I found really valuable. It's written by two people. I think one is maybe both of them are psychiatrists, but they're at least psychologists, and they both have ADHD. So they wrote this great book, and it was really validating to hear, wow, I'm not nuts. Like, these things are actually a part of a problem that I have. And the psychologist gave me some tips. She said, if I'm working on something that I don't want to do and I have to concentrate, to set a timer. And this is a great tip for anybody, to set a timer for 20 minutes. And in that 20 minutes, do everything I can to work on that project and put all of my energy into that. And then set my timer when that's up for 20 minutes and do something different or fun. But within that 20 minutes, I can only do one thing, which I'm like, man, she knows me. So instead of doing like three things, just concentrate on the one and come back to that concentrated task. So that's been really helpful as well.
That's awesome. Those are good tips for me too, actually. Thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing your peer story. I think it really helps us relate and recognize that we can do hard things. I'd love to hear some about your entrepreneur story now. Tell us how you got started.
Okay, well, I actually am in a class right now that helps entrepreneurs build their business. And one of the things they asked us was, what was your first experience as an entrepreneur? And I remember in middle school, I was in agriculture. I loved doing stuff with plants and growing things and animals. And so I loved ag. And I sold onions. We would go harvest the onions, clean them off, bunch them up. What are they called? Not French. Green onions. And so we sold those to the teachers. I would go around, I would choose another student to go with me, and we would go around at the last period of the day. And so that was kind of my first taste of entrepreneurship, making the sale. I love the challenge of it. I've also read some research about ADHD, people with ADHD, how they make better entrepreneurs. So I think that's great info for parents, teachers. I mean, there's been research done for students who might struggle with it, trying to find their way, helping them build that part, that entrepreneurship muscle when they're young. I think that is like such a fantastic thing that you can do, because school is really hard and really frustrating. And a lot of people with ADHD college isn't an option. So if we're great at fast thinking and coming up with quick ideas, then why not start them now? And that's my side note.
I love it. Selling onions as the prequel to all that you've done. That's awesome. I know years back you started a nonprofit called I Still Matter. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so in 2011, my father died, and I started drawing to kind of cope with some of the grief and coloring. And I was just, by myself a lot, and I guess needed something to do. So the drawing kind of helped me cope. And I realized this might be a great opportunity for other people too. Maybe it would help others. So I started inviting people to Chamberlain's downtown. And for those of you that don't know and are from Jacksonville, just so you know, I lived in Jacksonville for 10 years, and that's how Sherry and I met. And so I Still Matter is also based in Jacksonville. It's still running, and I think it's on its 6th or 7th year now. So I Still Matter came to fruition from the idea that other people could benefit from art, from this type of therapy, because even though it's not art therapy, so to speak, art is therapeutic. So I just thought, what a great thing to do. And I did it as a peer. So we started meeting at Chamberlain's bookstore downtown. And one time I think we had 28 people, which was just mind blowing. And I thought, this is really cool. And for those of you in Jacksonville that remember One Spark, it's kind of like crowdfunding, but in person. And there are like 500 people set up. And so I was encouraged to do One Spark by some people. And I did, and I got a lot of great feedback. And that's how we became a nonprofit and started doing work in the community. I loved the challenge of it. I saw the opportunity, and I knew no one else was doing it or was going to do it unless I did it. And I was able to be creative and artistic. And it really helped me flex my art muscle, because before anything, I'm a photographer, but I knew if we were going to have groups that people came to, that we couldn't do photography at every group. So I just started drawing, sketching. I just did black and white line work for a long time, and for a couple of years actually. And I started selling at the arts market, at Riverside Arts Market in Jacksonville. And that's kind of how Carmen K Art came about. Do you want to show maybe some of the pictures now so people
can kind of see,
just to get an idea of what I do? And while she's sharing the pictures, I'll tell you. This is called cyanotype, and I can do a lot of different things with it. Maybe you've heard of it before or seen it, but it's basically photography. And whenever I put the chemicals on, I mix two photographic chemicals, and it makes this beautiful blue color. I can put it on fabric or paper. It doesn't hold well on a lot of things like wood, things that are porous. It doesn't really stay very well. But so when I moved to Chattanooga, I went from making abstract art to doing this, because I was just so excited about my surroundings. And you can go through it a little bit, Sherry. I started making journals. I made ornaments, Christmas ornaments, and I always sell out. Some of my stuff is in shops around, I was going to say Jacksonville, around Chattanooga, but also I have some stuff regionally. I recently started doing clothing, which I posted that baby onesie on Instagram, and it sold in like 3 minutes. It was ridiculous. I do workshops, and on the right hand side there, you can kind of see my booth set up. I do markets, because I think face-to-face markets are maybe the best way for me anyway, to sell items. I also have received a couple grants since I've been in Chattanooga, and this was one of them. So that's my work on an electrical box, which was really exciting for me. So I have some public art, which is cool. That's just something that I did recently.
I love this one. I absolutely love it. I could totally see that in my family room. We're switching here. This isn't art anymore. What are we doing here, Carmen?
Yeah, so switching it up. When I moved into, this is the first house we ever bought, and we bought a house in Chattanooga. I mean, there were a couple things going on. Well, first of all, I moved, and the pandemic happened like 6 months later. So imagine moving to a state where you don't know anybody. You don't know anything about anything. You just know it's pretty, and that's where you want to go. And going through a pandemic, it was really, really hard. And actually last summer, I started having panic attacks, and daily. It was really a bad thing to go through. So all of these things happening at one time, moving into a new house, moving to a new state where I didn't know anybody, going through a pandemic, just like, what is my purpose? What am I doing? Why am I here? All those things were just floating around in my head. And I just kept remembering how I wanted to feel more grounded, and I didn't. And so one of the things, like once I started coming out of that, and I worked really hard to do that, I actually wrote on a big piece of paper. I woke up one morning and I thought, just focus on the cure. And I don't mean the music group, even though that's great too. I mean, like, what is my cure for this panic, for this anxiety, for this feeling of not being grounded? So I wrote on an 11 by 14 watercolor paper, the cure, and I wrote everything that I needed to do: eat, sleep, were actually the priorities. Getting really good sleep was the start. But writing just everything that I needed to do and focus on: meditation, calming down when I need to, sitting and resting when I need to, saying a prayer, just, all of those things that worked for me. And I would carry it around to every room that I was in and put it up so I could see it. Because medication that I tried during that time wasn't helping. It was making things worse. And I realized I had to do it by myself. At the same time, my grandfather, who just turned 90, was in the went into the hospital, not for COVID, but for something else. And he was having panic attacks. So I just said to myself, I have to get this under control. There's no way I can be 90 having panic attacks. So I worked really hard to get here. And when I did get here, it happened slowly. I thought, I need bees. I don't know why. My father is in the picture up top there. He's the tall guy. He was a beekeeper. And I just kind of do everything that my dad does. He's a firefighter. I've been a volunteer firefighter. He's a photographer. I'm a photographer. And now I'm a beekeeper. And that picture below is the excited look on my face of me getting my first nukes, or nucleus colony, my first bees, basically. And that is me catching a swarm. I caught a couple swarms this year. Of course, wanting to have, talking about wanting to be stimulated all the time. Can you imagine what it's like? I mean, maybe some of you are beekeepers, but just imagine what it's like to be in a bee, in front of all these bees, and you're going to put them into a box. It's like the coolest thing ever. And I love it so much. So, of course, when I started doing bee stuff, I thought, how can I make this into a business, right? So I slowly but surely have started creating some things. It's called Nooga Honey Pot. And I had someone make that for me because my dad and his cousin had their initials on their frames, on their bee frames. So I thought that was a really cool way to honor that. And I made this Nooga Honey Pot lip balm, which Sherry has some of and says it's great. So I'm using some of the wax from my beehives to make the balm, but I'm also using some wax from my beehives to put on top of artwork that I do. So it protects and it seals, and it's been around for ages. I've made soap. I just have these beautiful picture opportunities of comb and bees and beautiful things. And here's some postcards I made called my pollinator series. So if you're my friend and we're talking and you're like, oh, hey, I have this thing that I made. I'm like, all right, I've already have the whole thing planned out for you. We've got your name, we've got your Instagram, your logo, everything. It's just, that's what happens in my head automatically. As soon as I see something awesome, I'm like, let's make it into a business. I think maybe I've just trained my brain to do that. And here is our family pic. My husband is a science teacher, and those are my babies, my 3 babies.
So what's next for you, Carmen?
Next for me, for
in your entrepreneur story.
That's a good question. I think just doing more with the beekeeping is something that I want to do. I want to train mentors. I actually started a nonprofit up here only because I wanted to be able to get donations. It's called Nooga Queen Bee. And the Nooga part, by the way, is Chattanooga, which I realize some people don't realize what that means, but the Nooga Honey Pot, it's just Chattanooga. So Nooga Queen Bee is basically just a bee club for women. It's a male-dominated field, and I wanted to specifically have women be able to have a place to go that wasn't intimidating, and didn't have a bunch of men 55 years and older in the group when you walk in the doors. It feels kind of strange. So anyway,
I love it. Can you tell us maybe what are some of the challenges that you've experienced that are associated with owning your own business?
Yeah, I think well, first of all, pricing can really be a challenge. That's something that, I would ask other people, compare my work to things that others were doing. I have kind of become a really good stalker, and that's kind of what you have to do when you realize you have something that you want to sell or market. You have to see what other people are doing. So, I mean, that can also be challenging because you can question yourself. A lot of people have imposter syndrome. So they just, think mine isn't good enough as this person's. So, don't compare yourself to others. They're not you, and that's okay. And especially people like where they're at compared to you. If you're just starting and they've been doing it for 10 years, give yourself a break. And I think like time management, because I have so much flexibility, that can be difficult, especially with someone with ADHD. But keeping a schedule, I kind of, after doing this for about, 4 or 5 years, I've been able to say, okay, when my husband goes to work, I'm at work. I don't get up at 5:30 like he does. But if it's, if he, through his workday, when he comes home, I take a break. I'm like, okay, now I get to take a break from what I'm doing. And I usually end up coming back to it and doing stuff later in the evening if I have some events or something that I'm working toward. So time management, being able to do it, and also, being able to actually work, because I work from home. I don't want a studio because I want to be able to have access to my house and take care of my dogs. So I have a home studio. So another challenge is having all this crap at your house and having to find a way not to be overwhelmed or overstimulated from, having so much stuff around you. So keeping things.
Also a lot of beautiful art.
Yes, but
it's everywhere.
Really crowded and cluttered, and that I have a lot of sensory issues. So that, like last night before the presentation, I was like organizing the space so it wouldn't overwhelm me. So yeah, just making sure, you have a space to put stuff, and not giving up, I think, is probably the best advice that I can give somebody, because people give up too easily. They, I've done a show before. I did Art Walk and I sold $5. And like all of this stuff that I've put together, I had 2 tables full of artwork, spread out. And I thought it was beautiful. And I only sold something for $5. And that was really upsetting. And I would see people, one girl in particular, who would set up a couple of times when I set up, and she would get upset because she wasn't selling anything and she would leave early. And I was like, why are you doing that? Don't leave early. Don't quit. Keep doing it. Find out who your market is. That's the best thing I can tell you. If if I'm marketing, my stuff is botanical, right? So if I'm at an event that's a punk rock thing, like I'm not going to sell anything there, maybe, right? Like you have to figure out what matches what you're doing and where you need to go. That's like one of the best things I can tell you too. But don't give up.
I love that, because there's lots of bumps in the road in life in general, but I could imagine owning your own business and trying to make that be successful, that, not everything is a win. You are going to face
Yes.
Some flops, some failures sometimes. So I love the advice about not giving up. There must be benefits.
Yeah, I mean, side note, the last event that I did, I made $1,100. So in 6 hours,
Nice.
I made $1,100. But the other thing that you need to do is you need to figure out how to navigate the things that you do and the things that you set to the side and you don't do them anymore. And so what I did was I did Art Walk and I did the market, which the market has thousands of people every Saturday. And after all the time spent setting up, going early, setting up, because they block the streets off, it was about 10 hours that I was at Art Walk, setting up and getting ready for Art Walk. So I divided what I made on average at Art Walk by the amount of hours. And I think it was like $6 or $7 an hour. And so I recommend people do that, because that's not worth it for me. But at RAM, it ended up being like 40 something dollars an hour, right? So I just stopped doing Art Walk. Easy. So being flexible, that's one of the things that's a benefit, I would say, about it too.
Nice. I like how you figured that out for yourself so that you know how to prioritize.
Yeah.
What are some of the other benefits associated with owning your own business?
I work from home, so I can do what I want, whenever I want to do it. And that's, it's a luxury for some people, and I can appreciate that. It might sound privileged, and it is. But what my husband and I have done is live within our means. We decided that this was an okay thing for us to try. We bought this house that was affordable for us. We had we said we don't want to go over $950 a month. If for our payments, we're like, we don't want to overextend ourselves and then crash, if something happened and I couldn't make art, or if he got fired, could we work at the Circle K and still make our monthly payment? And that was really important to me, especially after seeing a lot of people who had just bought things that were really above their means. And that just all came crashing down. So I think that's a benefit, is being able to see realistically what you can do, and being able to say, I'm okay with that. I'm happy where I'm at. I don't have to have any more. Like I feel secure, I feel happy, and I don't come home angry and exhausted and tired. And when I worked in the mental health field, that's how I felt. I actually got shingles when I was 30 years old from stress. And that's kind of like what my whole 15 years of working in the mental health field led me to. And that's just me. And I know everybody's different, but yeah. So having the freedom to do what I want, and not having to wait for someone else's approval. If I have an idea, I don't have to go up the chain of command. I am the chain of command. I do what I want. So that's great. I mean, I think everybody probably wants that freedom, and maybe you've found that in a full-time job, and that's amazing, but I never did. And I felt bad. I worked at the Pace Center for Girls, and I don't know if you know it, it's only in Florida right now, I think. But it's very successful. It's a school for girls that are at risk of failing, basically. So the idea is to get them back on track and get them to be able to graduate. And you go for the day. So I was a counselor there, and I felt I think I was just very blessed with the executive director there, who really liked my relationship with the girls. I started the first garden there. And girls, like with their hair done and their nails done, would just come knock on my door and say, Miss Carmen, can you take me to the garden? I'm like, all right, but you're going to get your hands dirty. Just no. And they're like, that's okay. And I mean, they didn't even know like an eggplant or tomato grew on a plant. Like, wow. But at the same time, I was doing art with them and with my own girls that I was counseling. So I was encouraged by the executive director, who really liked what I was doing, and that like having somebody else be that encouraging and let me have that freedom was really wonderful. And that's when I left there to go do I Still Matter full time, because I just felt confident in myself and my own skills. And if you can't find it from somebody else, like you have to find that in yourself, or else you might wait around forever for you to feel that way. But you have something value to offer the world that no one else does, and you just need to do it. That's my attitude.
I love hearing the theme that you've always had this interest in nature and in art, and you have figured out how to take your passion and use it to help pay your bills and be your livelihood. And I know that's got to be stressful sometimes. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to how you navigate your wellness with the responsibilities of owning the business.
Yeah. So being able to stop, being able to say no is a big part of it. When you're a small business owner and someone asks you like, hey, do you want to do this? Or can you do this? Your instinct is to say yes, because you're like, oh, I need to do that. Right. But learning to say no is the best thing that I've done for myself. Being able to put up boundaries and keep them, resting when I need to, especially learning that over the past year. after dealing with panic attacks. One of the best things I read from that is the woman who, I think from Australia, I can't recall for sure, but she's kind of loosely known as the founder of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And I listened to something that she said, like a talk that she gave about it. And she said, whenever you feel like you're rushing, and you're having this panic and all this anxiety, you need to intentionally slow down. Like literally slow your body down, walk slowly, talk slowly, do everything slowly. So I've learned to do that to help me realize it's like, if I don't finish these journals by tomorrow, it's not a horrible thing. Like no one even knows I'm making them. It's fine. I have other things to sell. That's been a really big deal for me, is learning that it's okay to slow down. Also learning the things that are worth your effort and the things that aren't. That's been a really great thing for me to realize. Hold on.
This is real life.
It's just getting louder.
This is the world of technology and Zoom and webinars.
Hold on a second.
Oh. Well, I hope everyone is enjoying learning a little bit about Carmen. We've got a couple of more points that we're going to go through and then open it up for your questions and interaction.
UPS. It was UPS. It's over.
Oh, okay. Love it. Love it.
The other thing
you had mentioned something to me when we talked earlier about spending money to make money and how important that was. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The best thing for me, because we're not millionaires and I just don't have $100,000 laying around to buy everything that I need whenever I need it, is when I do an event, I use that money and put it back into my business. So, the $1,100 that I made goes back into buying supplies that I need to make more things for the markets coming up for Christmas. So you are going to have to spend some money, but you don't have to do it all at one time. So breaking things up, if you know that your target is to do this thing, break it into smaller things. And that's okay, because that makes things more manageable and you don't get discouraged when you realize you can't do everything that you want to right now, because you got to be realistic. Not a lot of people can. So even if you're working a full-time job now, if you do it right, you can work to do a part-time job and then do your business part-time. And hopefully eventually, if you want to, merge it, to doing your business full-time. But things take time. So don't get overwhelmed by that.
That's good advice. Can you tell us about what resources you use to help get you started in your business? And are there any that you still use?
Yeah, there's a small business association in every community, and they're really valuable for information, for connecting you in different ways. I think like social media outlets, that's a great way. It's a great free resource. But I hear people complaining a lot about Instagram changing its algorithm and now people don't see you, whatever. So you have to realize these things are free and they're not owned by us. So if Instagram were to go away, I ask myself this question a lot because I make a lot of sales on Instagram. Like, where would I go? If you have a website, that's great, but it's not like people just suddenly found your website one day, So figuring out, like having someone to help you navigate those things for your business is a really good idea. You can find reputable entrepreneurship mentors and classes. There's a class that I'm taking now called Co-Starters. It's a 10-week course, and we go through all the dynamics of entrepreneurship, knowing yourself, knowing your customer, but make sure it's reputable, because I feel like I've seen a lot of ads and I've seen a lot of people selling this stuff and the money's wasted because it just isn't a good thing. So do your research on what it is. But other small business owners are also really valuable in the process and have been really helpful for me too. Just being able to say like, hey, who do you use to do your accounting? Like, how do you do this thing? How do you do this thing? You know, people ask me now all the time. I'm actually working on an entrepreneur class or workshop that I want to give via Zoom. So, because so many people do come and ask me that are kind of just starting, getting their art business off the ground.
Nice. I love that you're still, I mean, you've been doing this a while, but you're still reaching out and seeking education to expand and do better. So if you were to go back and give your former self, your pre-entrepreneur self, any advice, what would that be?
Probably start sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what would you share with the people in attendance today or to encourage them if they've got ideas and dreams of their own?
Well, I think not listening to the negative voices in your head or the people around you is probably a good place to start. You know, you always have people that are like, that's not what you do it this way. Actually, my dad was that way. He's a firefighter for almost, 30 something years. He worked firefighting, he worked for 24 hours. He was off for 48. And those 48 hours that he was off, he had a lawn mowing business. So he was constantly working. And I remember when I was graduating college, I came to him and I said, and my mom, I sat them down. I was like, I'm going to the Peace Corps, just so you know. And he's like, no, you're not. You're going to get a job like everybody else and stop like expecting people to pay for you. And I was just like, what? So you're always going to have the people that are going to tell you it's not going to work. You just need to do this. You need to do this. My advice is don't listen to them. If you have a way to still feel secure in your life and support yourself in that way, you know, it could be a conversation that you have with your partner, like I did with mine. My job is literally killing me and I hate it. I have to get out of here. And we just said like, okay, let's try this thing. Like, go ahead and see how it goes. And it's worked. So, and it's not easy, but it's doable. So starting sooner, not listening to other people's negative crap and trusting your instincts, you know, that there's only one you. And I just kind of feel like I always talk to my girls about this when I was counseling. Like, what is the thing that you wanted to do when you were really little? Like, everyone think of that right now. Everybody has a thing. Like, you know, I wanted to be a veterinarian. I wanted to go into marine biology, but I just somehow like those were stomped out somehow, right? Like our innate dreams are kind of like stomped out of us somehow because we're in school and it's hard and we can't do math or, you know, whatever happens. But think about it. I wanted to be a veterinarian and I wanted to be a biologist. And look what I'm doing. Like, I still feel grateful to have somehow been able to work that out. But I think that if we're not doing that thing that we know innately, then something's off. You know, it just doesn't feel right. And the last thing that I have here, because I wrote a lot of this stuff down, because let's be honest, I have ADHD, I would forget all of it. I can never be a server. I mean, as soon as someone would tell me what they'd want, I would just have to turn around and ask what that was again. I just can't remember stuff. So writing stuff down is so helpful. But there's a quote by Viktor Frankl that I had hanging up when I was doing in-home counseling with families that were involved with the state, called Family Builders. And I think it might be called something different now. They were in the process of renaming it whenever I was in the field, but I hung it up on my desk. What is to give light must endure burning. So I was like, okay, it's okay that I feel like crap and I have shingles and like I feel burnout every day, right? Because I'm giving light and I'm gonna get burned. And then one day I walked to my desk and I was like, screw that. I started resenting that because the realization of not wanting to hurt myself in the process and feeling guilt about not wanting, you know, like feeling guilt about that. Like, is it okay that I want to be okay? Do I constantly have to suffer? Is that what I'm put here for because I'm supposed to help others? So I actually had a therapist say, you know, you're helping others with your art, with the work that you're doing, the way that you inspire people and encourage them. And that made me feel really good, because even though I'm not necessarily doing, you know, face-to-face therapy or counseling, it is in a different way. And the people that have to work a 9 to 5 and that's what they choose can see my work and just for a moment think, oh, it's so beautiful. I love that, you know, and I think that's good enough for me. So
Carmen, I love it. Thank you so much. That's so much good information, and I feel so inspired